The story begins with Queen Eleanor, who gives birth to a daughter named Snow White. Snow White grew up to be a beautiful and brave child, until one day the kingdom was shocked by the news of the queen's death, which made King Magnus and Snow White drown in sadness. After that, King Magnus leads his army to fight the dark forces of demons entering his territory. The forces of darkness have been defeated and they find a beautiful female prisoner named Ravenna. King Magnus, who was captivated by her beauty, immediately took her to his palace and married her. Though the king did not know that this Ravenna was a cruel evil witch, and all this was Ravenna's plan. On the first night when King Magnus wanted to making love with Ravenna, he was suddenly surprised by Ravenna, who stabbed him to death. After that, Ravenna met his younger brother Vin, who had brought the Dark Army according to their plan, and immediately stormed the palace. Snow White, who accidentally saw her father, who had been killed by Ravenna, immediately ran for her life, but unfortunately she was caught by Ravenna's army. Meanwhile, William and his father, Duke Hammond, managed to escape. Then Ravenna ordered to kill all the members of the kingdom except Snow White. She led her to stay alive and locked her in the palace tower. Under Ravenna's rule, the surrounding area, including the vegetation and land, became dark. A few years later, Snow White is no longer a little girl, but has become a beautiful, brave, and powerful princess. Then Snow White was startled by her armies, who brought a new captive of a beautiful girl named Greta. She was caught by Ravenna's armies when she was about to go to Duke Hammond's castle. It turns out that Ravenna's beauty was obtained by absorbing the aura of beauty from beautiful women. After that, Ravenna asked into the magic mirror, "Who is the most beautiful woman in the whole world?" The mirror says that Snow White is now the prettiest and she is destined to destroy Ravenna. But the good news is that Ravenna can live forever and be the prettiest if she eats Snow White's heart. Ravenna immediately ordered her brother, Vin, to bring Snow White before her. Meanwhile, Snow White is approached by a bird who guides her to find a spike outside the tower wall. Shortly after that, Vin came and lusted to see Snow White, but when he was about to perform his lecherous act, Snow White immediately stabbed her spike into Vin's body. Snow White used the opportunity to escape, but she was caught by the palace troops and chased after her. But Snow White managed to escape by going into the drain.
Bring her back to me!
Then Snow White met the white horse and ran to avoid the pursuit of Ravenna's army. Snow White's escape came to a halt when her horse was stuck into the mud. She had to continue on foot and into the forest of darkness. This forest made Snow White feel dizzy and hallucinated while inhaling the smoke powder in the dark forest, then made Snow White unconscious. At the palace, Ravenna is shocked when Vin informs her that Snow White has escaped and entered a forest of darkness. Ravenna was very angry and immediately told Vin to find a hunter who knew the state of the dark forest in order to find Snow White as soon as possible. Then Vin went to a village and found someone who had entered the forest of darkness before. This man's name was Eric the Huntsman, a widower and a drunkard. Then Vin brought her before the Queen of Ravenna. Ravenna asks Eric to lead his troops into the forest of darkness to find Snow White, in exchange for Ravenna promising to resurrect his dead wife. Eric believed what he said and accepted Ravenna's offer. Now Eric guides Vin and his men into the dark forest. Snow White, who had fainted, now woke up because she heard a voice from a distance. Snow White immediately ran and hid inside the roots of a large tree there. But Eric found her. Then Snow White said that she would be killed if he handed her over to Ravenna. Snow White's words confused Eric, so Eric didn't immediately hand Snow White over to Vin. Eric asked him to revive his wife first. However, Vin reveals that Ravenna does not actually have the ability to bring dead people back to life. Of course, this made Eric angry and immediately attacked Vin and his troops. After successfully defeating Vin and his troops, Eric finally helped Snow White to escape from Vin's pursuit. At Duke Hammond's castle, William is informed that Snow White is still alive and managed to escape from Ravenna. Since Snow White was his childhood friend, William sets out to find her. Vin, who had recovered, gathered a group of great fighters to join the search for Snow White. As they departed, William appeared and offered to join them as an archer. William immediately showed his archery skills to Vin, and he was allowed to go find Snow White. As Snow White and Eric search for a way out of the forest of darkness, suddenly they are startled by the awakened Tammuz and attack them. Huntsman tried to fight Tammuz, but of course Eric lost beaten by the Tammuz. Snow White, seeing this, immediately mustered up the courage to confront Tammuz. Suddenly, Tammuz melted and left them. Eric and Snow White continued their journey and arrived at a village across the river. They were greeted by women whose faces had been deliberately scratched to render them useless to Queen Ravenna. Here, Eric was told that Snow White was the daughter of King Magnus. This made Eric feel shocked and feel burdened, because if he continued to be with Snow White, he would continue to be hunted by Ravenna's troops. So that night, Eric quietly left Snow White. Shortly thereafter, Vin came to attack the village and burned it down. William saw Snow White, but couldn't get to her because he was blocked by the flames. Eric, who was not far from the village, turned around and saw that the village had been attacked and burned. Then Eric immediately ran back towards the village. Arriving at the village, Eric immediately looked for Snow White and took her to escape from the chaos.
Come on, let's go!
In the palace, Queen Ravenna's strength began to weaken. This made her thin and wrinkled. Therefore, she had to find Snow White as soon as possible. Eric and Snow White, who already felt safe, rested for a while, but they were captured by a group of dwarfs. At the time of interrogation, Snow White said that she was the daughter of King Magnus. The dwarves were instantly surprised to hear that. Then one of the blind dwarves named Mirror came and said that it was true. The woman they captured was descended from King Magnus and was destined to defeat Queen Ravenna. Suddenly, the sound of horses running was heard, which meant that Vin and his army were close to them.
Queen Midas! Oh, come, Wolfgang God!
The dwarves then released Eric and Snow White, then took them to the fairy sanctuary and spent the night in the place. The next day, Snow White was awakened by two little elves and led her to a small pond, where there was a white deer in the middle of the pond. Eric and the dwarves were impressed to see Snow White so close to the white deer, which he said was a mystical deer. When Snow White stroked the deer, suddenly Vin's army came and shot the deer, which made the white deer turn into a group of butterflies. Eric, Snow, and the dwarves ran to evade Vin's army, but they lost quickly. Eric then fights Vin, while Snow White and one of the dwarves are saved by William. Eric, while fighting Vin, manages to defeat him by pushing him into a broken tree. Ravenna, as Vin's brother, felt what Vin felt. Because Ravenna's strength was weakened, so she couldn't help Vin, which made Vin have to die. Later, Vin's army wanted to shoot Snow White, but was blocked by one of the dwarves named Gus, but William managed to kill the archer. Snow White is deeply saddened by the murder of Gus, because all this was caused by her. That night, they prayed and buried Gus by burning him.
Fill the salt marsh and beat on your drum.
The next day, they continued their journey to William's father, Duke Hammond, to ask for help. Then William apologized to Snow White because that time had left her. Since the journey to Duke Hammond's castle was far away, they decided to rest and spend the night in the forest. At the palace, Ravenna is deeply saddened and angry over the death of her brother, Vin. In the morning, Snow White walks around the forest and meets William, who suddenly teases Snow White. After kissing, William gave an apple to Snow White, and when Snow White ate it, suddenly the apple turned hairy. Then Snow White felt pain in the chest, so it was difficult to breathe. It turned out that Ravenna had disguised herself as William, so that Snow White would eat her poisoned apple. Eric, who knew that Snow White was not there, immediately woke William up. Then they looked for Snow White. Just as Ravenna wanted to kill Snow White for her heart, Eric and William came, making Ravenna instantly turn into a bunch of crows. Ravenna is hit by William, Slash, and Eric. Then Ravenna leaves.
Save her! Help her!
After that, they took Snow White to Duke Hammond's castle and laid her on the bed. Eric, who is devastated by what happened with Snow White, expressed regret for saving Snow White too late. Snow White's heart and spirit reminded Eric of his late wife, whose attitude was the same. Then Eric kissed Snow White, after which he left. But suddenly, Snow White woke up alive again. Because of Eric's second true love for Snow White that freed Ravenna's magic. Then Snow White walked out of the palace, making the people there stunned and shocked to see Snow White come back to life. Then Snow White made a little speech, if she could defeat the evil Queen Ravenna. Snow White's words made the spirits of the people in the castle burn and prepared to help Snow White to fight the Queen of Ravenna. Meanwhile, Ravenna absorbed countless young women to recover her strength. The next day, Snow White and Duke Hammond's troops set off for the palace where Queen Ravenna was. Once there, the dwarves infiltrate the palace to open the gates. As Snow White's troops headed for the palace gates, they came under attack from the fortifications, which killed several of her troops. With cooperation, the dwarves managed to open the gate. Snow White's army entered and fought against Ravenna's army. Snow White, who saw Ravenna upstairs, immediately approached her and was about to fight her. Finally, Snow White met with Ravenna, followed by Eric, William, and the other troops. Ravenna immediately deployed her demon glass army to fight them. Meanwhile, Ravenna fights Snow White. Here, Snow White is easily defeated by Ravenna, as are Eric and William, who are overwhelmed by the glass army. When Ravenna tries to kill Snow White holds her back and stabs Ravenna with a knife. Remembering that Snow White was the one who could kill Ravenna, Ravenna died at Snow White's hands and grew old.
You can't have my heart.
After defeating Ravenna, Snow White was crowned king of the kingdom and things became peaceful and harmonious. The film closes with a look between Eric and Snow White,